The word epic gets thrown around a lot on the internet these days, but if there's one game that defines the word, it's The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64, originally released back in 1998. What is widely regarded as the greatest game of all time has now been re-released for the Nintendo 3DS in 2011. But this is not a straight port like the GameCube re-releases were, neither is this a reimagining of the classic. Instead, it's the same game you know and love. The story, the dungeons, the items are all as you remember. Rather, the most notable upgrade with Ocarina of Time 3D is its graphics. Obviously it's now in full stereoscopic 3D, I'll get to that in a bit, but graphically everything has been improved. The character models, the draw distance, and even the backgrounds. Yes, the backgrounds are no longer fuzzy cardboard cutouts or pre-rendered pictures. Death Mountain, for example, is now a full 3D model, as too is Castletown, although you still get the fixed camera view to keep every bit of charm the N64 original holds. In these cases, like most, keeping these exact representations works, as people who remember the classic can relive its glory as it was, with no tampering, just a lot better looking. So too can be said for the newcomers who would look at the original as a relic, yet still enjoy this masterpiece to today's standards. You see, that's the beauty of the 13-year-old game. Its gameplay was and still is so legendary. Every dungeon is laid out so meticulously, there's the right amount of challenge and sense of progression, that it never becomes tiresome. Even when you become stuck and can't figure out what you need to do next, the game keeps your interest. You want to see what's around the next corner. The problem with the N64 version was if you did get completely stuck and you had no way of figuring out what to do next, you were left on your own. Now though, you have the option to activate brief video clips called visions, which serve as hints as to what you need to do next if anyone is stuck. They work in much the same way as the Super Guide did for New Super Mario Bros. Wii, but they have to be activated first at special Sheikah stones. Updated visuals and hint systems aren't the only noteworthy additions. Ocarina of Time 3D makes full use of the 3DS's features, like its gyroscopic technology. Now you can physically move the 3DS to aim items in first person, such as the bow and hookshot. You can however opt for the traditional analog stick control, but I found the gyroscope surprisingly accurate as well as being immensely satisfying. The only problem is that it won't work well with the 3D turned on, as it will obscure your vision, something I was willing to sacrifice for when using said items. The 3D effect itself is some of the greatest I've seen for the handheld. Upon stepping out onto Hyrule Field, it stretches out far into the distance. Fireflies daintily hover around the screen in Kokiri Forest, giving the world a great sense of depth and life. In comparison, if you choose to switch the 3D off, when you want to use the motion controls for example, the world becomes surprisingly flat. Even if that sounds gimmicky, it's purely because you're so enthralled in the world that a change like that becomes incredibly noticeable. Then again, would you expect anything less from Nintendo? Actually, the game was primarily developed by a Japanese company called Grezzo, who only have one other title to their name, a Japan-only WiiWare release. That may seem very risky on Nintendo's behalf to give a virtually unknown developer the task of porting their most widely praised game of all time to their brand new system, which is still trying to find its own ground. But you've got to hand it to Nintendo and Grezzo. They done good. In fact, they've done so good a job of porting Ocarina of Time over to the 3DS, they've even left in minor annoyances of the original. I personally haven't found any glitches on the N64 original or the 3DS remake, but apparently they've left them in for fans' sake. Strange, but whatever. The same goes for Navi the Fairy. In fact, she's even more annoying in the remake. On top of all the times she stops you to point out the obvious with her now infamous, "Hey, listen!" She'll now tell you to take a break if you've been playing for too long. "Shut up, I don't care. If I get square eyes, you're not my bleeding mother." Thankfully, other annoying aspects of the original have had a welcome change. While I'm not one of them, many people hated the Water Temple for two reasons. The fact that they'd always get lost, and the constant pausing of the game to open the menu just to swap out the iron boots when needed. The Water Temple itself has now been given a new lick of paint, with markings to help your sense of direction. Plus, you can always use the hint video. Hooray! No more getting lost. As for the iron boots, they've been handily changed to a regular item that can be assigned to a button, which saves so much time. Instead of having 3 buttons to assign items, you now have 4, the X and Y buttons, and 2 more touch buttons on the right hand corners of the touchscreen. The Ocarina has now been permanently moved to the bottom left side, which now makes it easy to quickly access it. One really helpful improvement to the Ocarina itself is the fact that you can bring up your music sheet while you're playing, in case you can't remember exactly how the song went. something that the original versions made annoying by having to keep swapping between menus. Which is something else that makes the 3DS handy, the fact that its second screen acts as the menu. The maps are handily laid out on the bottom screen, which is very convenient for the later, more complex puzzles. With all of these upgrades though, there's bound to be a few other aspects that have stayed the same and are now unfortunately hard to ignore. Even though I said many character models have been upgraded so they suit the original artwork, others have been barely touched and look as wooden as they were 13 years ago. The same can be said for the textures. While some have been improved, others up close can look very, very ugly. Also, the soundtrack, while obviously legendary in itself, is just a mid-eye soundtrack from the N64 version, with no changes. Even though there is one track at the end credits that's been fully orchestrated and sounds amazing by the way, it would have been nice for the whole soundtrack to get the same treatment. Then again, beggars can't be choosers. The thing is though, just as Ocarina of Time was a reason to buy an N64, Ocarina of Time 3D is now a reason to buy a 3DS. Even for veterans who own every version, and for people who have never picked up a Zelda game before. The game's pacing and upgrades make this the definitive version. Plus, Master Quest, a modified version that's mirrored and a lot harder with reworked dungeons, is unlocked once you finish the main game. And there's also a boss rush mode where you can replay any of the game's brilliant boss battles. Even without any multiplayer or Street Pass modes, the whole package will last you at least 50 hours plus. So, is this game perfect? No. No game ever is or ever will be, but this is as close to gaming perfection as you're ever going to get. Undeniably, 10 out of 10.